The Clarity Act is being painted as an inevitable legislative victory that will permanently secure the future of cryptocurrency. However, examining the actual legislative text and the rapidly closing congressional calendar reveals a completely different reality orchestrated by legacy banking institutions. A hidden regulatory compromise regarding stablecoin yields threatens to completely centralize digital asset rewards, while the White House crypto office sits entirely vacant. This coordinated bureaucratic delay is engineered to trap your purchasing power inside traditional financial infrastructure just as a massive macroeconomic deadline approaches. My name is Lewis, and you're watching the Coin Bureau. First, let's get the numbers straight so that we could get a sense of the size of the pile that TradFi is looking to gobble up. The total stablecoin market cap has recently exploded to approximately $315 billion. And to put that massive sum into proper perspective, you need to look at the actual transaction throughput occurring on these decentralized networks. In February of 2026, monthly stablecoin transaction volume officially hit $7.2 trillion. That specific transaction volume actually surpassed the United States Automated Clearinghouse Network for the first time in history. Stablecoins now account for an astonishing 75% of all cryptocurrency trading volume worldwide. This represents a parallel financial architecture that operates entirely outside the traditional banking cartel, and with unparalleled efficiency. Standard Chartered analysts are currently projecting that this specific sector will reach $2 trillion by the year 2028 under favorable regulatory conditions. But this exceptional growth has triggered panic among traditional banking institutions who view these yield-bearing digital assets as an existential threat to their core business model. Furthermore, 11 different crypto companies filed for or received conditional national trust bank charters within a highly compressed 83-day window ending in early March. The crypto industry is aggressively building out institutional-grade infrastructure regardless of whether Congress provides a clear federal framework or not. Meanwhile, the American Bankers Association recognized that if stablecoins are allowed to pay a 4 to 5% annual yield on standard balances, customers will immediately trigger a massive deposit flight from traditional savings accounts that typically pay less than 0.5%. I mean, do you really need an accountancy qualification to know that that's a good deal? Therefore, the banking sector has spent an unprecedented $56.7 million aggressively lobbying the Senate Banking Committee to completely eliminate any provisions allowing cryptocurrency exchanges to pass those yields onto retail investors. This relentless financial pressure resulted in the Tillis-Alsobrooks Compromise brokered in late March this year. This specific legislative maneuver explicitly bans passive yield, which is the interest that you earn simply for holding a stablecoin in your digital wallet. However, the compromise technically permits what lawmakers are calling activity-based rewards, which sounds like a reasonable middle ground for the industry. However, the fundamental structural flaw with this compromise is that absolutely nobody in Washington has actually defined what activity-based legally means. The legislation grants federal regulatory agencies a full 12 months after the bill passes to draft the precise definitions of these permitted activities. So, put simply, the government is demanding that the crypto industry accept a massive restriction on its business model today in exchange for a regulatory definition that will be written behind closed doors a year from now. This creates a scenario where DeFi protocols could be fundamentally crippled while they wait for hostile regulatory agencies to determine whether their specific yield mechanics are legally permissible. Beyond DeFi, major centralized crypto platforms like Coinbase currently derive over 25% of their total corporate revenue from stablecoin operations. So, if this yield ban passes without explicitly defined protections, it could devastate the revenue models of the largest digital asset infrastructure providers in the United States. Senator Angela Alsobrooks publicly acknowledged that this highly ambiguous text will leave both bankers and crypto firms unhappy. But that minor unhappiness for a banker translates directly into a catastrophic loss of yield generation for the everyday retail investor using decentralized protocols. And speaking of tracking these massive institutional power plays before they hit the mainstream headlines, well, this is exactly why you need the Coin Bureau Club. This is where we share the latest breaking news, provide a deep dive alpha, and give you the most important market updates. Whether it is a hidden clause in a newly proposed regulatory framework or a sudden shift in congressional voting blocks, our community members always see it first. So sign up today by using the link down below or by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen. Okay, let's return to the supposedly bullish regulatory green light that some have been celebrating over the past few weeks. On March 17th, the SEC and the CFTC issued a landmark 68-page joint interpretive release. This established a formal taxonomy that officially classified 16 major digital assets, including Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and XRP, as digital commodities. Because these specific assets represent approximately 80% of the total crypto market cap, this was widely perceived as a massive victory that permanently shifted oversight to the more industry-friendly CFTC. But there's a gremlin hidden in the small print. This document is completely exempt from the standard notice and comment rulemaking process, which means that it carries absolutely no binding legal authority in a federal court. It's merely an interpretive release, which means that any future regulatory administration can completely erase this commodity classification overnight without requiring a single vote from Congress. SEC Chair Paul Atkins explicitly described this joint guidance as an important bridge while Congress continues its legislative work, implicitly acknowledging its entirely temporary nature. Without the Clarity Act to permanently codify these classifications into federal stature, well, the entire digital asset industry remains trapped in a state of perpetual regulatory fragility. This is precisely why 66% of institutional investors surveyed by Ernst & Young still cite regulatory uncertainty as their primary barrier to deploying capital, even after this joint release was published. You might assume that the White House would be aggressively pushing to finalize this legislation to secure its stated goal of making the United States the cryptocurrency capital of the world. Unfortunately, though, the executive branch has completely abandoned its operational influence over this critical market structure bill at the absolute worst possible moment. On March 26th, David Sachs officially departed from his role as the White House AI and crypto czar after hitting the 130-day statutory limit for special government employees. And instead of transitioning into a permanent operational role to guide the Clarity Act through the Senate Banking Committee, well, he moved to an external advisory position as the co-chair of PCAST, an advisory council that produces external reports rather than actively negotiating legislative text with hostile banking lobbyists in closed-doors Capitol Hill sessions. The White House has meanwhile officially confirmed that it will not appoint a replacement for the crypto czar position, leaving the administration without a dedicated legislative point man. Now, the shift from an operational crypto czar to an external advisory council represents a massive surrender of executive influence at the exact moment that the industry needs a powerful advocate the most. This leadership vacuum essentially guarantees that the final legislative text will be heavily influenced by the traditional finance sector, rather than the decentralized technology pioneers. And what's more is that this administrative abandonment leads us directly into the massive political bottleneck that is currently threatening to destroy the Clarity Act immediately. The legislation is currently being bundled alongside highly contentious housing policy reforms and community bank deregulation packages. And whenever politicians attach completely unrelated legislative provisions to a critical market structure bill, they exponentially increase the number of potential veto points that can derail the entire process. And the congressional calendar is rapidly approaching a breaking point that the crypto market is completely underestimating. Senator Bernie Moreno has explicitly warned that if the Clarity Act does not reach the Senate floor for a full vote by the Memorial Day recess, well, the legislation will effectively die. Once the summer recess begins, the entire political apparatus will pivot towards the November 2026 midterm elections, making complex financial legislation far too toxic for any vulnerable politician to support. Prediction markets like Polymarket are currently giving the bill approximately 64% odds of passing this year, which shows extreme sensitivity to every single rumor emerging from the banking committee. However, institutional prediction platforms like Kalshi are showing a miserable 30% likelihood of passing before June, reflecting the grim reality of this highly compressed legislative timeline. Now, if this bill fails to pass before the midterm election frees this congressional calendar, the consequences for the global macroeconomic landscape will be absolutely devastating. The crypto industry will be forced to revert to the fragile interpretive framework that can be instantly revoked by whichever political faction assumes power next year. We would witness a catastrophic acceleration of capital flight as innovative blockchain developers permanently relocate their operations to jurisdictions like Singapore. Meanwhile, the $74.9 billion currently being held within spot Bitcoin ETFs will simply sit inside institutional cold storage vaults managed by legacy asset managers like BlackRock. TradFi will successfully monopolize the underlying supply of digital commodities while simultaneously ensuring that the decentralized infrastructure required for true financial sovereignty remains legally paralyzed. The legacy banking system is actively weaponizing the legislative calendar to ensure that you are permanently separated from the gains generated by decentralized technology. They are desperately trying to force your digital assets back into their fee-extracting custodial products by deliberately starving the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem of permanent legal clarity. Furthermore, if controls of the House or Senate flips during the upcoming midterm elections, the entire legislative process will be forced to restart from zero in 2027. This would mean enduring another massive wave of regulation by enforcement, while the legacy financial system continues to relentlessly absorb the foundational architecture of the crypto market. On one hand, the SEC and the CFTC have provided a temporary regulatory bridge that technically classifies the majority of the crypto market as digital commodities rather than unregistered securities. On the other hand, this bureaucratic guidance is completely unenforceable in court and serves as a dangerous distraction from the rapidly closing legislative window for the Clarity Act. Time is running out. But what do you think? Will the Senate manage to pass this critical market structure bill before the midterm election freeze takes effect? Or do you think that the traditional banking cartel has already successfully orchestrated the permanent delay of decentralized financial infrastructure? Let me know your thoughts on this massive regulatory battle down in the comments below. And if you want to understand exactly how institutional asset managers are fundamentally altering the underlying mechanics of the Bitcoin network, then you should definitely check out our deep dive video right over here. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is Lewis, signing off.